So the power of salary sacrifice, particularly in relation to pensions, that will be the focus of it, because pensions is something that affects all. Over the years, we've become a pensions and payroll bureau as opposed to a payroll and pensions bureau. They form a far bigger part of what we do now than they ever did before. And that really only grows over time. More and more people ask questions about pensions. We see more and more maladministration of pensions. People make mistakes, don't do it right. So our aim in life is to educate employers and educate employees. Employees need to save for the future. Employees need to do all they can to help them. And we need to do all we can to educate both parties so that they do those things. So we're going to look at it first. What is a salary sacrifice? So a quick look at what salary sacrifice is, and perhaps what it isn't. I have a habit of talking around subjects that are just on the agenda, so I'm not going to do it. So we'll look at salary sacrifice. We'll look at pensions specifically. I did a pensions webinar a little while back. I've lifted a few of the slides from that because I think it's really important to look at the options around pensions, the type of pension schemes, what they can do, what the benefits of them are. So apologies, I'll be going over some old ground, but I think it's very important to see salary sacrifice in a broader context. Holiday arrangements. So, holiday buyback schemes and flexible holiday arrangements and all these type of things are very much a relatively new innovation. They've become increasingly popular over the last few years, and they are generally dealt with through a salary sacrifice arrangement. So it's important to understand what they are, what the benefits might be, and what some of the pitfalls might be, because all things have pluses and minuses. So we'll look at the pros and cons of these things. Implementation and other considerations. That's very much a number of points that should be considered when you embark on a journey that involves going into salary sacrifice. So we'll look at what you do need to do, a couple of myths that are out there around what you need to do that you don't actually need to do. And then we'll have some questions at the end if anyone feels that they need to. I'll be happy to answer them generally. And of course, we're always available in a more individual basis to answer specifically questions about you, your employment situation, your employees, etc. So that's the kind of shape it will take. So what is a salary sacrifice? So a salary sacrifice arrangement is where an employee gives up or sacrifices an amount of their salary in exchange for a non-cash benefit. So they give something up and the employer provides something in return. The most common examples of salary sacrifices are pension contributions, bicycles, cycle to work schemes, ride to work schemes. They have many names. Childcare vouchers, which are over time diminishing because you can't join a new childcare voucher scheme, and as people leave employments, they disappear. So there aren't that many left now. And then annual leave. And perhaps the only other one that's quite common is tech schemes of one type or another, where you can buy a piece of technological equipment, an iPad or a PC or whatever, and do that through a tech scheme, which are available through some employers. There used to be, going back 5-10 years, you could salary sacrifice pretty much anything you wanted to. So if you wanted to buy a vacuum cleaner, you could do it through salary sacrifice. If your employer allowed it, wouldn't be a problem at all. But HMRC did eventually cotton on to the fact that some of these things were quite clearly a tax dodge. So nowadays, these are the schemes that HMRC approve, really. Other schemes, you have to consider the implications. You have to look at optional remuneration arrangements and all the rest of it. And in very many cases, it becomes so complicated you wouldn't embark on that journey. But for pension contributions and annual leave, not too complicated in terms of the way it's done. Salary sacrifice arrangements will always constitute a change to the they'll change the employee's salary, and they will therefore require contract of employment to be changed or amended, or an addendum to that contract of employment to cover off the fact that their salary is no longer their salary. It's now a reduced figure. Very often the original salary, what we would term the notional salary, is going to have relevance within what we're doing. Very often employers will continue to use that figure for calculating pay increases or overtime rates, and all those type of things. So a notional salary still is a very important thing. If you try to get a mortgage, your mortgage advisor would likely be interested in your salary, the top line. So but it is a contractual change, and it's important to know that because it does have implications. So that's that one. So yeah, I said we go over the pension basics because time and time again we find that people don't necessarily have a full understanding of the different types of pension that are at large in the world. And we talk glibly about relief at source, net pay arrangement, and salary sacrifice because they're all different. So I thought it'd be useful to just run over those three types of pension arrangements so that we can understand where the salary sacrifice is providing a benefit. So that's that one better. So relief at source scheme. Contributions are made from income which has already been taxed. So when you see it on your pay slip, or the employee sees it on their pay slip, it will come from your net pay. So 80% of the total employee contribution. So when I talk about the total employee contribution, we're now kind of, very often that's based on AE compliance. So if you talk about an AE compliant rate typically being 5%, then for an employee in a relief at source scheme, they'll see 4% on their payslip, because the total employee contribution will include tax relief of 20%, which is claimed by the pension provider. So it is, ultimately, you'll hear a lot about tax saving in relation to pensions. If the employee is making the same contribution, so they're making a 5% contribution, if they don't change that, and if they do what they need to do to get their tax relief, then everyone will get the same tax relief on their pension. It doesn't matter how you do it. Salary sacrifice, net pay arrangement, relief at source, you will get your tax relief in some form. What changes is the way you get it, the actions that are required on your part to ensure that you get it. So it is, when people talk about tax savings, they're probably more referring to NI savings. There are tax savings to be achieved through other routes, which I will cover. But for an employee making same contributions through different schemes, there won't be a tax saving. It's a kind of a myth, really. So quick example, employee wishes to make £100 contribution to their pension scheme. They will pay £80 into their scheme via the payroll. The scheme administrator will reclaim £20 from HMRC and add it to their scheme. That's assuming they have a national insurance number. If they don't have a national insurance number, that might not happen. Total contribution to pension is therefore £100. So through that route, £100 goes in the pension, and their net pay will have, or their total pay will have been reduced by £100 net pay. So if we move on to net pay arrangement, so here it's slightly different. Result is the same. Contributions are made from pre-tax earnings. So here it's a ridiculous name for what is a net pay arrangement, is actually where the contributions are made from your gross pay, nothing to do with net pay whatsoever, but it's known as a net pay arrangement or net NPA. So contributions are made from your pre-tax earnings, so that's your pay before tax is calculated on it. So in this case, the tax relief is coming directly through the payroll. You're paying less tax at the point in time you're paid, so no one needs to claim it back. You get it immediately at that point in time. And what you will see on your payslip, if you were contributing 5%, is you would see 5%. So unlike a relief at source where you see 4%, you will see the full 5%. So the employee wishes to make £100 contribution to their pension scheme. They will pay £100 into their pension via payroll. Their gross pay will be reduced by £100, but their tax will be reduced by £20 for a standard rate taxpayer. So again, the net loss from their earnings is £80, and ultimately into the employee pension pot will be £100. So you've got exactly the same result as you had before. You've got £100 gone in the pension pot, and ultimately the cost has been the same to you. So simple salary sacrifice. So there are kind of two types of salary sacrifice. The salary sacrifice arrangement requires a change to a contract of employment. So we've got to cover that off. 100% of the total employee contribution is deducted from pay before deduction of tax and national insurance, importantly. So national insurance is an issue here. It wasn't in the previous two. The employee benefits from immediate tax relief at the highest rate. So if they're a higher rate taxpayer, they'll get tax relief at the highest rate. So immediate tax relief. If we skip back to the relief at source scheme, if someone is a higher rate taxpayer, they will not get tax relief at the highest rate without doing something. That something can be complete a self-assessment tax return. Very often high earners will do that as a matter of course, not always, or they will need to contact HMRC and get that additional tax relief, but it won't come automatically. So it's always important to know that. So if someone sits and does nothing on £100,000 a year, in all likelihood, they won't get the full tax relief to which they are entitled. So for them, a salary sacrifice scheme or a net pay arrangement would be beneficial. For some lower paid earners, it definitely wouldn't be. So there's a trade-off here. Sometimes it's about knowing your business, the way it works, what your demographic is, and applying the correct scheme. But in national insurance terms, salary sacrifice will also provide a benefit. So here we are looking at £100 contribution again. They'll pay £100 into their pension via payroll. Their gross pay will be reduced by £100, but their tax will be reduced by £20 and their NI will be reduced by £8. So in this case, that £100 contribution to their pension pot will have cost them £72. So in the previous cases, it's cost them £80. But in this case, it has cost them 72. So there is a saving there. And the whole premise of salary sacrifice is that national insurance saving is a benefit to them. And as an employer, you'll be paying 13.8% employer's national insurance. And so if there's an employee's national insurance saving, there is also an employer's national insurance saving, which is bigger and goes to the employer. So there's a saving there. Up until the NI rate changes back at the end of last year, that saving was £12. Then obviously those rates reduced and it diminished to £10 and then £8. Of course, the employer's national insurance rate didn't change because that wasn't something that affected workers. And it was all about giving the right impression to the worker rather than keeping employers happy. So that's simple salary sacrifice. And then you'll come across, or you may have come across, the term smart salary sacrifice. Now, a smart salary sacrifice is an acronym, is it? I always get muddled up with these things, but SMART, save more and reduce tax. For tax, read NI because you don't actually save any tax, but I guess the acronym wouldn't particularly work if it was SMARN or SMARNY, perhaps. So it's save more and reduce tax. Now, what this type of arrangement does is we've seen on the previous slide that we've achieved a saving. And as it currently sits, that saving will go to the employee in the form of increased net pay. So they get their extra £8 in their pocket and they can go and buy a couple of Costa coffees or do whatever they wish to do. With a smart salary sacrifice, the aim of the exercise is to invest that into the pension. So instead of giving it to an employee in their pocket, they are going to remain with the same net pay. So under relief at source or under NPA, they're going to get the same net pay, and you do some tricky calculations in the background, and to balance the two, it means the employee contribution has increased. So essentially the saving they've made through NI eventually gets ploughed back into their pension. So it's I've made a saving, I don't miss what I've never had, and therefore I put it into my pension, and at some point in the future it will become a benefit to me. So that's, you don't see it used very often. Some businesses do use it. You can achieve the same objective in other ways, by increasing the rate of contribution to take account of the NI change, for example. But it's another variation, because you'll often find that when you're looking at pension providers' websites, they'll be basing a lot of their thinking on the fact that that contribution is being ploughed straight back into the pension, and that's why they're quite confidently talking about a tax saving, because if you put more in, so previously I said, if you put the same amount in, 5%, £100, whatever it is, you won't get a tax saving. You just don't get a tax saving. It's impossible. But if you increase that contribution with no effect on your net pay, then you can talk about a tax saving. You do achieve a tax saving. So the NI saving is basically boosting the employee pension contribution. So that's the whole aim of the exercise. So that's a smart salary sacrifice. So I've done a quick example scenario here. So I've taken an individual who is earning £35,000 a year, 5% employee contribution, 5% employer contribution, total pension contribution of, so £35,000, 5% by the employee, £1,750. So that's what's going into their pension pot, one way or another, either via relief at source or via net pay arrangement. That is the amount that will end up in their pension pot. The employer pension contribution is unaffected by any of these things directly. We'll go on to the possible indirect effect under salary sacrifice in a moment. So that individual, the pension contribution is £3,500, and they take home £27,319.60. After salary sacrifice, so we've implemented a salary sacrifice arrangement for that individual. Exactly the same is happening. There's still £3,500 going into their pension pot. There's been, ultimately it's ended up costing the same in terms of tax, but because of the NI saving, the take-home pay has increased. So the NI saving has allowed them to take more of that money home. This is not a smart salary sacrifice. This is a simple salary sacrifice where the employee is seeing the benefit in their net pay. So the employee saving is £140 annually. Doesn't sound like too much. And the employer saving is £241.50. So what's together £381.50 that's been saved, with the potential to invest that in the pension or to take benefit in other ways. And that's obviously based on current NI rates. As I say, if I'd done it a year ago, the benefit would have been greater for the employee saving. So it's a bit unfortunate, but there we go. So on to the next slide. So £381 annually. I don't know. I looked at that figure and I thought, that's a bit depressing, really, isn't it? It's not a huge saving. It's there, but when you count it in terms of cost of coffees or a trip out to the pub or whatever it is, it's not huge. So I thought, I'll set about some calculations and see what it actually means when you get to the end of it. So pension saving is always has been about saving early. The earlier you start to contribute to your pension, the better off you'll be. If someone tells you need £1 million pension pot and they've told you to start saving at age 55, then I can tell you from personal experience, it's not going to happen. However, if at age 22, someone tells you need £1 million pension pot and this is how you achieve it, it's probably very well achievable. It's not something that you you can't think about doing and plan for. So that said, I thought, okay, so we've got an individual who's age 22 at the moment, and as an employer, I'm trying to tell him that a salary sacrifice is beneficial to him. How can I do that? So I'd like to claim credit for all the calculations, but I did plug it in an AI engine because I thought, oh, can't be, but I could work it out if I wanted to. But what with compound rates and investment growth and all the rest of it, I figured, nah. But obviously the things we know about monthly contribution, I approximated it to £12. So that's the additional contribution because that employee has contributed their NI saving. I've rounded it for the sake of argument. There are so many assumptions when you get into these things about pensions. I mean, investment growth is dependent on government requirements in terms of you can use this percentage for that, and you have to give the 3 scenarios and all the rest of it. So there's always going to be approximations. But he's starting at age 22. He's hoping to retire at age 67. He'll be lucky if things change, but you never know. Investment period, 45 years. Assumed annual return, 5%, blah, 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 blah. Little formula on the right-hand side there. Yeah, absolutely. So what does that mean to the guy at the end of it? It means his pension pot of retirement has grown by £24,417. Sounds a bit bigger, a bit easier to sell to an individual. Don't get into the complications of inflation and all the rest of it. It might not look like that in 45 years' time. With the employer saving added, so we'll look at that in a minute, but that employer might say, well, I know I'm saving my 12.8% national insurance. I'd like the employee to benefit from that because I don't miss what I've never had. So that employer, as we see a fair number of employers do, say they contribute that to the pension pot too. With the employer saving added, then that employee gets a pension pot that's based on the saving alone. So we're not talking about his contributions here. We're saying he saved some money and he put it in his pension on a day-to-day basis. He didn't see a change in his net pay. With the employer saving added, he's benefited by £66,500. So that sounds a bit better, doesn't it? That's a bit more impressive. Happy with that. And then I thought, okay, well, if that's for an individual in a scenario earning £35,000 a year, what does that mean for our business? We've got 8,000 employees or so. So I looked at April. I looked at every individual on a who was not in a salary sacrifice scheme. So obviously salary sacrifice schemes already benefit. I said, if every individual was age 22, which clearly they're not, but if they've made that decision at age 22, every individual on our payroll for the month of April, based on their earnings at that point and their employees' rate of contribution, what would their pension pot look like when they retire? And as a group of individuals, 8,000 or so people, then their pension pot would be £5.8 million bigger. Now we're talking some real numbers. And then I said, well, those employers are all kind-hearted souls, and they want to contribute too. And that would push that pension pot growth for those individuals up to just over £10 million. I thought, yeah, okay. So it's, like all these things, it's small amounts of money. Looking at the Olympics at the moment, British cycling, it was all about incremental gains, wasn't it? Reduce your weight of your bike by 2% and, increase your aerodynamic efficiency by 2%, etc., etc. You do the same in business, don't you? You take if I can increase my margin by 2%, if I can reduce my cost by 2%, I can suddenly have a pot of money that I didn't expect. And it's very much the same here with making those small savings, little changes can have a big effect at the end of the day. And the best bit about it is, instead of being in the government's pocket, it's in your employees' pension pots, and they can benefit from it directly. So that's the bigger picture, which I did really to convince myself that salary sacrifice was a great thing. So I was a lot happier at the end of that. Advantages of a salary sacrifice in relation to pensions, although some of these will also apply to any other salary sacrifice. So in this case, there are two scenarios. You've got the choice of either higher take-home pay. So you've ploughed that saving into your net pay, you've taken it home, you've spent it, saved it, whatever. Or you've increased your pension contribution. So one of those two advantages will apply. It won't be both of them. Tax band management. So this is a little bit outside the realms of salary sacrifice arrangements per se, but it's increasingly important in the way that people deal with bonuses. High rate taxpayers deal with the way they are paid, or you as an employer help them to achieve tax efficiency by providing options around ad hoc payments or higher salaries. So it's really highlighting the fact that you as an employer, if you're going to pay someone a significant bonus, it will be advantageous, probably, or it may well be advantageous to pay that bonus as a contribution to a pension, as an employer contribution, as opposed to giving it to the individual for them to be taxed and pay national insurance on, and for you to pay national insurance on. So, you know, that £10,000 bonus for a superb job well done is worth far more to an individual as a £10,000 employer contribution to their pension fund than it is when they come out of it and the tax man's taking £5,000 out of it, or whatever the figure is. So using pensions as a strategy to improve the return on that employee's investment of time. It's a useful thing to consider. I occasionally suggest it to people when they're in senior positions and they're in a position to kind of deal with that themselves. But as employers, it's a great way to make it a better place, make it more attractive for someone to earn a bonus. Everyone gets really hacked off when they get a huge chunk of tax deducted from their bonus. Of course, there's the bigger picture of education on the value of pensions, because if people don't believe pensions are valuable and are going to work for them in the future, then it's that spend to save thing. They're not going to want to do that. But with the right noise around it, knowing the right things, understanding the right things, it works better. So that's bonuses and tax band management, both sides of the same coin, really. It's thinking about, how that income is going to be taxed or national insurance paid on it, and coming up with creative solutions, perhaps. Reduced employers' national insurance. So we've talked about that. There is an NI saving there for the employer. How that employer chooses to spend it is entirely up to them. As I say, some will invest all of that into the employee pension pot, some will retain it, and it's entirely the employer's discretion. Universal credit. Again, some people are in receipt of universal credit that you perhaps wouldn't expect. Universal credit is based on an employee's net pay, not their gross pay. So if an employee is earning £70,000 a year and sacrifice £30,000 of that into a pension, they would significantly reduce their net pay, and they might find they were eligible for benefits that they wouldn't otherwise be eligible for. So an individual planning, I'm not condoning this, I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. I do know that employers do offer these options that are beneficial because people can take advantage of the way universal credit works, for example. So it's a consideration. There are other kind of unlikely scenarios where you could benefit as an employer. For example, employment allowance. There is employers' national insurance threshold of £100,000. There's always someone on that threshold, at or near that threshold. Someone who just tips over the balance doesn't get the employment allowance of £5,000. Someone who is under does get it. And a salary sacrifice pension arrangement could be the difference between getting it and not getting it. So, it may have an advantage that is, probably a 1 in 100 chance, but nonetheless, we see it. Yeah, a couple of clients every year are on the cusp, and you think, well, if they'd been salary sacrificed, they would have benefited from that. Same with apprenticeship levy, higher levels, but again, tipping into the apprenticeship levy, £3 million pay bill. Tipping over that threshold again. If you're doing salary sacrifice, it just reduces the pay on which those things are measured. So worthy of mention, but only in passing, really, because they're unlikely, but they do happen. It's just like it's unlikely that someone's born on the 1st of the 1st 1990, but some people are. HMRC, we went on a webinar recently where the percentage of the population born on the 1st of the 1st 1990 is hugely disproportionate against every other pay date, and that's because if someone doesn't know a birthday, they pop in 1st of the 1st 1990. Everyone used to do it, and so but someone within that is actually at that point, so you never know. Anyway, then there are disadvantages, of course, for every yin and yang and all that malarkey. There's always something, a downside to everything. Things you got to consider: national living wage and national minimum wage considerations. So we're talking about a change to a contract. You're effectively reducing the rate of pay for that individual. Their hourly rate will diminish because their contractual pay has reduced, but their contractual hours haven't. So every time the national minimum wage goes up, someone will be in a position where they can no longer contribute under salary sacrifice in a compliant way. If you're on £11.44 an hour, you can't contribute under salary sacrifice without contravening legislation. Up until about 4 or 5 years ago, it was a subject of great debate whether or not it was okay to do that, because they are benefiting in another way. But it was made clear a while back, and so you have to consider that. And as I say, every increase we see, you see someone who previously could contribute and now they can't. So you need to consider it. Perhaps those 1144s need to be inflated to a point where the NI, at least the AE compliant rates, can be deducted from it without contravening legislation, but you need to consider it. State benefit eligibility: anything that is based on your salary or your gross pay can potentially be affected by a salary sacrifice. So if you're at or near a level of earnings where those type of things are going to be affected, then you need to consider it. You need to look at it as an individual in this case, because you as an employer wouldn't, you're not responsible for that. But as an individual, if I'm looking at it and it's affecting something I would get and it's reduced my pay, then I as an individual would need to be aware of that and would need to consider it. Loan eligibility potentially could have an impact on that. Salary's reduced, your pay's reduced, so your borrowing capacity will be reduced, be it for a mortgage or a loan of another type. I think most lenders are much more up to speed with these things than they used to be, and would probably consider your notional salary. But you do need to be aware of it, because you do still get people who can't understand the difference between the two. Entitlement to statutory payments. So, for example, most obvious example is SMP. Again, it's earnings related. So anything that reduces your earnings can potentially reduce your entitlement to a statutory payment. So you, again, need to consider it. Life cover. Life cover is provided by more businesses than it used to be in our sector, at least. Big companies, I think, always used to provide it, but in the small to medium sort of sector that we work in, it's much more common than it used to be. People are much more switched on to the benefits of private medical insurance and life cover of some description. But again, any benefit is related to salary or earnings. So you reduce your salary, you reduce your potential pay out on that cover. So you just got to be aware of it, really. So implementation, here are just covering a few things that kind of you need to consider, we need to consider, need to be considered. Registration of the scheme. So ensure your current pension scheme supports salary sacrifice. I've put that because pension providers like to know what you're up to. Some pension providers like to know what you're up to. Others couldn't give two hoots about what you're up to. But the reality, you may need to talk to your pension provider, let them know what you're doing. Every pension provider and every scheme will support salary sacrifice. So you'll find providers out there who can't do a relief at source scheme. You'll find providers who can't do a net pay arrangement scheme. You'll find some providers who can do both. Because we're talking about employer contributions, so an employee contribution will be sent to the pension provider as an employer contribution. Every scheme will support an employer contribution, and therefore every scheme can be used in support of a salary sacrifice arrangement. So you need to consider telling them there might be changes to the uploads that we do to ensure that it's all recorded correctly. The last thing you want to do is not submit it correctly to the pension provider. The pension provider continues to claim tax relief on the employee contribution because the person making the submission doesn't realize that employee contribution isn't an employee contribution anymore. It's an employer contribution. That employee gets double tax relief, causes problems down the line. We see it time and time again when we take over payrolls. We've taken them over from Big Four accountancy practices and they don't know the difference. So you need to be aware. Notify HMRC. I mention this because some people think or believe that there's a necessity to register a salary sacrifice scheme with HMRC. There isn't. So a salary sacrifice scheme, you don't need to register with HMRC. You don't need to tell them, you can just do it. You can't register a salary sacrifice scheme with HMRC. In fact, you can set up a salary sacrifice scheme, you can do it, and then you can ask HMRC whether it worked the way you thought it would. They will do that, but they won't comment until it's in place, and you don't need to do that. Employee agreement, you need to get agreement from your employees. The communication thing is critically important. We've seen scenarios where people who we thought would entirely get it. Some employers roll out salary sacrifice and they have employees who say, this isn't working for me. I don't understand it. I don't want to do it. It's about the communication process. It's about making sure they know exactly what's going on. And from your point of view, it's making sure that they consent to any changes you might make. So at least one of the person sat around this virtual table at the moment, I know has very recently done it. And they did exactly that exercise, making sure that everyone clearly understood what was going on and was happy for that to happen. Yeah, they would have told them about the benefits, about the pitfalls, allowed them to make the decision. They then would have documented it. So you need to modify employment contracts to reflect the new salary and pension contribution arrangements. You need to consider the effect on other things, kind of reinforce the fact that, maybe overtime rates are based on their notional pay rather than their post-salary sacrifice pay, those type of things. Some of it's common sense, but nonetheless, you might wish to ensure that it's done in the correct way. Payroll setup, talk to us. There's nothing worse for us than being left out of the loop. Frustrating as hell when we get an IFA or employer say, oh, I talked to my IFA, we're going to do this, this, and this. And you say, yeah, okay, but how are we achieving this? What have you done? What have they said? What have there are so many whys and wherefores. So, IFA is very important. They'll help you pick the right scheme. They'll make sure that, perhaps they'll educate your workforce and they're registered and able to do that. We're not. What we are experts in is auto-enrollment schemes, how they work, the nuances of them, what the requirements are of the pension regulator, etc., etc. So please talk to us. It's a plea rather than an absolute requirement, but it really does help. And then we can help to make sure that it's all dealt with correctly, that things are on the pay slips as you want them to be or according to best practice. So So that's that really. Practical considerations, kind of implementation and practical considerations, much the same thing, really. I split them out and then I couldn't make up my mind which was which, I don't think. So default enrollment, you as a organization, when you're considering or implementing salary sacrifice, need to uh, decide what your default enrollment is going to be. You've got two options, really. You can put everyone in a salary sacrifice scheme with the option for them to come out of it should they wish to do so. So default into salary sacrifice. If an employee believes that their financial well-being will be supported by being in a relief at source scheme, that's a personal decision. That's a decision they make. If they want to do it, then they would notify you in the prescribed manner and you would change them. You usually have to have two schemes in place because you're usually having to deal with your potentially lower paid workers. Those are at or very close to the national minimum wage. So you're usually ending up with two schemes, not always. The alternative is to put everyone in a relief at source scheme or an NPA, relief at source or NPA, interchangeable. I'm not a big fan of NPAs because they disadvantage some lower paid workers. Whereas being in a relief at source scheme disadvantages lazier high paid workers who can't be bothered to claim the relief, whereas those at the bottom really won't get any relief. And so I always refer to relief at source scheme where the options are there. But they can go into relief at source scheme and you can ask them to opt into a salary sacrifice option. So you need to decide which way you're going to do it. It'll perhaps depend on your demographic, the employees that you've got, how easily you can help them to understand how salary sacrifice will work for them. I mean, it's important they know that either way, really. If you put them in a salary sacrifice scheme, lots of employers stick them straight in it. They don't know what the employee doesn't really know what the difference is. They can surf the internet for a day or two and they still won't be any the wiser. So education is key in all these things. Employers NI saving, I've talked about the saving. Some employers were rubbing their hands with glee saying we've got some extra money in the pot to spend on. And some employers are looking at the long-term position and thinking maybe we should invest that for the future of our employees. That is, I mean, something that you need to look at and decide what you're going to do is all I'm saying. Don't leave it to chance, just decide what you're going to do with it. Journals and reporting, again, an important consideration in terms in the way things are presented and journaled into your accounting system, because you're currently dealing, if you're in a relief at source or whatever, you're currently dealing with a employee contribution that the way you journal it in is going to change. Some employers want to leave the reporting the same, so it's not strictly in line with what's actually happening, but in their accounting terms, it works for them. And others want you to change it to reflect what's actually happening. So it's just understanding the changes, that something that is currently in gross pay will move somewhere else, and something that's in employees' pension contributions will disappear. So there's a plus and a minus. Ultimately, the cost is the same, but it's the way you put it into your business accounts that will change. Periodic review. So it's a necessity to keep an eye on things, particularly when things change in legislation. And the obvious one, the one that comes up every time, and I've mentioned it already, is national minimum wage, national living wage compliance. When rates go up, someone somewhere will fall below the safety net. They'll be in a position where they don't comply anymore. And someone somewhere needs to spot it and needs to deal with it and needs to educate and communicate with the individual concerned. So it's a job that needs to be done. And it pops up. It's remarkable how the national minimum wage has kind of crept up and does impact on people. Not so long back, you'd look at people on 23, 24 grand a year and think, oh, it was well above the national minimum wage. And now it isn't. And if they're on that and they're in a salary sacrifice, they're probably problematic for you. So you need to look at those. So that's probably about it, I reckon, on pensions. But we'll see when the slide disappears. So salary sacrifice holiday arrangements. So it's a salary sacrifice. So by definition, some employees giving something up, they're giving their pay up in return for a benefit provided by the employer. In this case, increased holiday entitlement. So that's what it is. They're also known as holiday purchase schemes or holiday buyback schemes or flexi holiday schemes. They come under all different guises, but essentially, and also some schemes allow employees to sell unwanted holiday back to the business. So some employers who provide holiday or give employees holiday entitlement above the statutory minimum 5.6 weeks, because you can't sell back holiday that would take you below that, or you wouldn't comply with legislation once again. But if you, for example, give them 25 days plus bank holidays, total of 33 days, you could sell back 5 days, or you could allow that employee to sell you back some holiday 5 days in that case. So these flexible arrangements are allowing you to buy and sell very often. So they can be beneficial for employees seeking more flexibility and work-life balance. So in today's world, lots more people want to work in a flexible way. And certainly the pandemic changed some people's perspective on the work-life balance, and now they would far prefer more holiday than a higher salary. So these schemes provide the opportunity to exchange one for the other. Employers benefit by offering a more attractive benefits package. Clearly, some employees are looking for that opportunity. So if they're looking for that opportunity and they're looking at you as a prospective employer, then having that available to them is going to offer them something that is beneficial to them and make you more attractive. So it's worthwhile from that point of view. So practical considerations, I've called it this time. I changed my terminology, but hey. So again, national minimum wage compliance, it rears its ugly head in almost every aspect of life these days. Because it's a contractual change, it will reduce pay. Your pay will shrink, but your contract hours will remain the same. If that's the case, then your hourly rate reduces. If your hourly rate is lower than it was before through joining this scheme, then there's a compliance risk. Maybe way above it, may not be a problem, but you need to measure that risk and ensure that entering a holiday buyback scheme is not going to create a problem. Deadlines. Most organizations will have I've called it a flex window, because flexible holiday schemes are quite popular, where they will open the flex window in advance of a holiday year start date. So the holiday year might start in January. They might open that flex window in November, offering the opportunity for employees to apply for additional holiday days. And there's clearly a time involved with that. Because it's a contractual change, you really don't want to be dealing with it every week or every month. So almost all businesses that do it will do it at a point in time. And if you miss that opportunity, you wait a year. You don't enter it halfway through the year. There will be exceptions, but in general terms, that is what will happen. And obviously from an HR and payroll perspective, HR will need to, sort out their contract side of it. Payroll will need to sort out the calculations. If people are prorated or whatever, there's more complications there. So there needs to be a deadline. There needs to be a clear timetable, and it needs to be, done in a controlled manner. There's a contract change again. So if we're talking about contracts, we need to be very clear on the rules of the scheme, defining how it will work, when people can enter, what they can do, what will happen when they leave, etc. Defining limits. So is there a maximum? Can someone buy 51 weeks and work for you for a week? Probably not. So what are those limits? If someone is already, getting 7 weeks holiday, not particularly uncommon these days, very uncommon in our business particularly, but there are out there. Are you going to allow them to buy 1 week, 2 weeks? When does it become a problem for you? And if you've got a holiday sell scheme aligned with that, then perhaps you can offset one with the other. And what are the specific rules for temporary or part-time workers? There is always there are a particular group of workers with challenges in many ways. Holiday is the obvious one, but there are also challenges in terms of if you're going to offer them the opportunity to join the scheme, how's it going to work? How are you going to prorate it? How are you going to deal with that issue? So you need to be clear about that before you embark on the route. And some clarity around holiday calculation for leavers. It's not particularly complicated, but it's sometimes a little bit difficult to get your head around it. So just setting it down, what the rules are, how it's going to work, will be absolutely of great use when someone leaves. Because they bought that extra holiday, there'll be two issues. There'll be an issue around the remaining deductions from their pay, and there'll be an issue around, their holiday needs to include what they've bought and how you deal with those. So it's an important area that you need to think about and be clear about. I've looked at a few holiday, obviously preparing for the webinar. The last thing I want to do is find that something's been invented and I hadn't heard of it. So yeah, I've looked at a few schemes. There's plenty of schemes out there that you can look at, particular organizations, the way they do things. So lots of NHSs and councils and those type of things, and PLCs, they're out there. You can look at them, you can see exactly what they're getting up to, what they're considering, what they're dealing, how they're dealing with particular scenarios, etc. So yeah, do some research, or we'll help you to do that research, but just make sure that you go in with your eyes wide open, and then you'll be good. No, there can't be much left. No, there's not a lot left. There's a picture of our old website now, so I didn't take a screenshot of our new website, but there is a new website. It's one or two kind of teething issues around memory usage and links and all that sort of stuff that you get with a new website. But yeah, it's there. It's a depth of resource far in excess of what we had previously. It's purely focused on payroll. There aren't many websites out there these days that are focused on payroll, because most people dabble in lots of stuff. Accountants dabble in payroll, they dabble in tax, they dabble in this, that, and the other. We just do payroll. So every facet and aspect of payroll we've got to cover off. And so we're trying to do that. So yeah, go there when you can, but be understanding of the fact that it's finally launched. We couldn't delay the launch any longer. We needed to get it there. But there's just a few teething issues which we're dealing with on a day-by-day basis. So do pay us a visit. This one's been in existence for a good 10 years, or the one that the screenshots of has been in existence for so long. People still go there, but yeah, we needed a refresh like lots of people do. And then there's always our YouTube channel with a growing number of subscribers. Apparently there's 63 subscribers on that. There's more than that now. So there's lots of videos on there, lots on pensions, because we do consider it one of our aims in life to make. We've got a pretty young workforce now, much younger than me. I'm the old folk now. Now Graham's left and retired then. So it's a young demographic in our workplace. They're very keen on educating people in pension savings and the benefits of pension saving. So there's quite a focus on that. I think it's very important. It's too late for me, but it's not too late for many other people. So if we can help them along the way. So that's it, I think, in terms of presentation. So said an hour, 58 minutes. Happy with that.